I'm so sorry, I was just... Sit, Silas commanded, gesturing to the empty velvet chair directly to his right. The investors are watching through the glass. If you stand there looking like a deer in headlights, the stock price drops 5 points by dessert. Sit down, put that tray on the floor and pretend you belong here. The ballroom of the Grand Ethelgard was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos, but all Mia could think about was her aching feet and the tray of champagne flutes she had been carrying for 4 hours. She was supposed to be backstage helping with the catering cleanup, but the labyrinthine hallways of the hotel had led her astray. Dazed and exhausted, she pushed through a set of heavy oak doors, expecting the kitchen. Instead, she found herself in a private, glass-walled dining room overlooking the city. A single circular table sat in the center, draped in white linen and set with gold-rimmed china. "You're late," a voice drawled. It was deep, smooth, and carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Mia froze. Sitting at the head of the table was a man whose face graced the cover of every financial magazine in the country, Silas Vane. His dark hair was swept back and his eyes, a piercing shade of slate gray, were fixed directly on her. I'm so sorry, I was just... Sit, Silas commanded, gesturing to the empty velvet chair directly to his right. The investors are watching through the glass. If you stand there looking like a deer in headlights, the stock price drops 5 points by dessert. Sit down, put that tray on the floor and pretend you belong here. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should tell him she was part of the waitstaff, but the sheer intensity of his gaze paralyzed her. She did as she was told, sliding into the chair. The contrast was agonizing. Her simple black uniform felt like a costume next to his bespoke suit. "What is your name?" he whispered, leaning in as if to share a secret, though his expression remained like stone. "Mia," she squeaked. "Well, Mia, for the next 60 minutes, you are the daughter of a silent partner from Zurich. You don't speak unless I nod. You don't eat unless I eat. And for heaven's sake, stop looking at the gold fork like it's a weapon." The doors opened again and a group of older men in charcoal suits filed in, their eyes immediately landing on the mystery woman at Silas Vane's side. The game had begun. Mia was no longer a caterer. She was the most important person at the billionaire's table, by total mistake. The air in the room grew heavy as the investors took their seats. The man directly across from Mia, a sharp-faced shark named Mr. Sterling, didn't even wait for the appetizers to be served before narrowing his eyes at her. "Zurich, you said, Silas?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I spend 3 months a year in the Swiss banking district, and yet I don't recall seeing a face as charming as yours at the galas, Ms. Mia. Which firm did you say your father represents?" Mia felt a cold bead of sweat roll down her spine. Her hands trembled beneath the table. She looked at the gold-rimmed plate, her mind a complete blank. She didn't know anything about Swiss firms. She knew about the price of eggs and how to get wine stains out of linen. Just as she opened her mouth to stammer an excuse, she felt something warm and solid. Under the heavy tablecloth, Silas had reached out and gripped her hand. His palm was large, steady and grounding. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on Sterling with a chilling smile. "Her father is old school, Sterling," Silas said smoothly, his thumb tracing a slow rhythmic circle over the back of Mia's hand. The gesture was hidden from everyone else, but it sent a bolt of heat through her that silenced her panic. "He believes in privacy, a concept you've always struggled with. He doesn't flaunt his assets at galas. He simply controls them." "Privacy is one thing," Sterling countered, leaning forward. "But a silent partnership in a merger of this scale requires transparency. Perhaps the lady can tell us her thoughts on the current volatility of the euro." Silas's grip tightened slightly, a signal. "I think," Mia started, her voice sounding surprisingly clear, "that volatility is often just a mask for opportunity. My father always says that if you're too focused on the noise of the market, you miss the quiet moves that actually matter. Like the move we're making tonight." The table went silent. Even Silas turned his head slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his slate-gray eyes. He hadn't expected her to have teeth. "Well said," Silas murmured, finally releasing her hand to pick up his wine glass. "I believe that settles the matter of her credentials. Shall we discuss the acquisition?" For the next 30 minutes, the conversation swirled around billions of dollars, But Mia felt Silas's presence like a physical weight. Every time her anxiety spiked, he would shift his chair just an inch closer, his shoulder almost brushing hers. He was protecting her, playing the part of the arrogant billionaire perfectly while shielding the girl who didn't belong. But the facade cracked when a waiter entered the room to refresh the water. As the man leaned over Mia, he dropped his napkin. He looked at Mia's face, his eyes widening in recognition. He was a coworker from the kitchen. "Mia?" the waiter whispered, his voice cracking the expensive silence of the room. "What are you doing? Chef is looking everywhere for. Is there a problem?" Silas interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency. The waiter looked at the powerful man, then back at Mia, who had gone pale. The secret was seconds away from being shattered in front of the most powerful investors in the city. The waiter's mouth hung open, his eyes darting between Mia's terrified face and the gold-rimmed plate in front of her. The investors leaned in, their predatory instincts scenting a drop of blood in the water. "Mia?" the waiter repeated louder this time. "The head chef is fuming. You were supposed to be." "I was supposed to be meeting him for the charity gala's menu review," Mia interrupted, her voice surprisingly sharp. She felt Silas's hand freeze under the table, but she didn't look at him. She stared straight at her coworker, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Marco, please tell Chef Henri that I'll be down to discuss the catering contract for my father's foundation once I've finished this meeting with Mr. Vane," she said, her tone dripping with a borrowed arrogance that made her skin crawl. "And tell him I don't appreciate being interrupted during a private dinner." The waiter Marco blinked. He had never seen Mia look so expensive. The midnight blue uniform he knew was hidden beneath the table, and her posture was that of a woman who owned the building, not one who cleaned it. "Ah yes, Ms. Mia. Of course. My apologies," Marco stammered, bowing his head and retreating so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. As the door clicked shut, the tension in the room snapped. Sterling let out a short, dry chuckle. "A foundation? You never mentioned her family was into philanthropy, Silas." "I prefer to keep our private interests private," Silas said, his voice a low growl of approval. He turned his head, his slate-gray eyes boring into Mia's. For a split second, the mask of the cold billionaire slipped, and she saw a flash of genuine intrigue, perhaps even respect. But the danger wasn't over. As the main course was served, Sterling leaned across the table again, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Since your father is so focused on quiet moves, perhaps you can give us your opinion on the recent scandal involving the Ethelgard's offshore holdings. It's quite the noise in the market right now." Mia felt her stomach drop. She had no idea what he was talking about. She looked at Silas, but he was casually cutting his steak, leaving her to fend for herself. "I think," Mia said, picking up her wine glass with a hand that was finally steady, "that a scandal is only a scandal if you haven't already planned for the fallout. And if Mr. Vane is as smart as I believe he is, the noise is exactly what he wants you to be looking at while he moves the pieces elsewhere." Silas set his knife down with a soft clink. He reached over, not for her hand this time but for his own glass. "Precisely. Sterling, if you spent as much time reading the fine print as you do fishing for gossip, we'd have signed these papers an hour ago." The dinner finally ended, the investors departing with reluctant nods of respect. The moment the heavy oak doors closed, the silence in the room became deafening. Mia collapsed back into her chair, the adrenaline leaving her body in a sudden, cold rush. "I think I'm going to faint," she whispered. "Don't," Silas said. He stood up, walking around the table until he was standing over her. He reached down, his fingers catching her chin and tilting her face up to meet his. "That was the most impressive performance I've seen in a decade. Where did a caterer learn to lie like a diplomat?" "I wasn't lying about the noise," Mia murmured, her eyes locked onto his. "I just know what it's like to have people look right through you." Silas's expression softened, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. "No one is looking through you tonight, Mia. Especially not me." Suddenly his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went deathly pale. "What is it?" Mia asked, sensing the shift in the air. "The head chef," Silas said, his voice tight. He didn't believe the charity foundation's story. "He's calling security to have an imposter removed from the VIP suite. We need to leave. Now." The elevator doors hissed shut just as the heavy thud of security boots echoed in the hallway. The gold-paneled lift ascended in a blur of motion, leaving the chaos of the dining room behind. Mia leaned against the mirrored wall, her reflection looking like a stranger in the dim amber light. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You could have just let them take me. You could have told them I was a delusional staff member." Silas stood with his back to her, his shoulders broad and tense. He watched the floor numbers climb toward the penthouse. "Because for the first time in 5 years, someone at that table wasn't trying to steal from me. You were protecting a man you don't even know, Mia. That makes you either very brave or very foolish." "I was just trying not to get arrested," she countered, though her heart told a different story. The elevator chimed and the doors opened directly into a space that took her breath away. The penthouse was a minimalist masterpiece of black marble and glass, suspended high above the city like a fortress in the clouds. Silas walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the lights of the skyline reflecting in his gray eyes. "They'll check the staff exits first," Silas said, unbuttoning his blazer and tossing it onto a leather sofa. "You'll stay here tonight. My head of security will wipe the guest logs and the hallway footage. By tomorrow morning, the daughter of a silent partner will have officially checked out and vanished." Mia walked to the edge of the glass, looking down at the tiny cars below. "And then I go back to being a caterer? Back to the kitchen like nothing happened?" Silas turned, his gaze heavy and unreadable. He walked toward her, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You can't go back, Mia. Sterling is a shark. He'll keep digging until he finds out who you really are. And if he finds out I used a waitress to fool the board of directors, he'll use it to dismantle my company." He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist before he pulled back as if fighting an instinct. "I need you to keep playing the part. Not just for a dinner but for the next month. I'm launching a new venture and I need a partner the world doesn't recognize. Someone they can't predict." "You want to hire me?" Mia asked, her eyes wide. "As what?" "As my shadow," Silas murmured, his voice dropping to a low, intimate frequency. "You'll have the clothes, the car, the accounts. You'll be at my side at every meeting. In exchange, I'll clear your debts and give you a life you've only seen through the windows of this hotel." Mia looked at him, this powerful, cold man who was suddenly offering her the world. "There's a catch, isn't there?" "The catch," Silas said, stepping even closer until his breath fanned her cheek, "is that the world has to believe you belong to me. And in my world, people don't just work for Silas Vane. They are devoted to him." He leaned down, his lips inches from hers. The mistake at the table was turning into something much more dangerous, a deal that would change both of their lives forever. The rain began to drum against the reinforced glass of the penthouse, turning the city lights into a blurred painting of gold and neon. Silas walked to a hidden panel in the wall, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He didn't look like the shark from the boardroom anymore. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the entire skyline on his shoulders. He handed a glass to Mia, his fingers lingering against hers for a second too long. "You should change," he said softly, gesturing to a silk robe laid out on the suede chair. "That uniform, it doesn't suit the woman who just stared down the Sterling group." Mia retreated to the marble dressing room, shedding the stiff polyester of her catering gear. When she emerged, wrapped in the heavy slate-gray silk, Silas was sitting on the oversized leather sofa, staring into a fireplace that flickered with artificial but warming flames. "You asked why I'm doing this," Silas began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth is, Mia, I'm a ghost in my own company. My father didn't leave me an empire. He left me a debt and a list of enemies that grows every time I breathe." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Sterling isn't just an investor. He's the man who drove my mother out of this city when I was 10. He thinks he owns me because he knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. I've spent 15 years being cold and calculated just to keep him from seeing a single crack in the armor." Mia sat on the edge of the sofa, the silk of her robe rustling. "Is that why you were at the table alone? No security, no real partners." "I can't trust anyone who knows the name Vane," Silas admitted, turning his head to look at her. "But you didn't even know who I was when you walked in. You saw a lonely man and decided to play along. That's a kind of loyalty you can't buy with $1 billion. He reached out, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly as he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "My secret, Mia, is that I'm tired of being the villain in everyone's story. I'm tired of being alone in this glass cage. The atmosphere shifted, the hum of the city fading until the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the synchronized rhythm of their breathing. Silas leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes, searching for a reason to stop. "If we do this," he murmured, his face inches from hers, "there's no going back to the kitchen. You'll be the most talked about woman in the country. Are you ready for that kind of noise?" Mia didn't pull away. Instead, she reached up, her hand resting against the sharp line of his jaw. "I've spent my life being invisible, Silas. Maybe it's time I made some noise of my own." Silas didn't wait for another word. He bridged the gap, his kiss hungry and desperate, as if he were a drowning man finally finding air. In the quiet of the penthouse, the mistake from the dining room felt like the only thing that had ever been right. The sun rose over the city, bleeding orange and gold through the penthouse windows, but the warmth inside was interrupted by a sharp rhythmic pounding on the heavy oak entrance. Silas was off the sofa in an instant, his defensive instincts snapping back into place. He gestured for Mia to stay back as he checked the security feed on a wall-mounted tablet. His jaw tightened. "It's Sterling," Silas hissed, his voice like dry ice. "He's not waiting for the office to open. He brought a private investigator and a notary. He's here to force a background verification on you, Mia. If he sees you in that robe, the story is over." "What do we do?" Mia whispered, her heart starting to gallop. "We lean into the lie," Silas said, his eyes flashing with a sudden wild inspiration. He grabbed a pair of his own sunglasses from the counter and tossed them to her. "Go to the bedroom. Throw on the most expensive-looking thing in the closet. There are samples from a designer shoot in there. Mia, act like I just woke you up and you're annoyed that a billionaire's morning is being interrupted by a peasant like him." Silas opened the door just as Sterling was about to knock again. The older man stood there, flanked by a man holding a thick dossier. "A bit early for a house call, isn't it, Sterling?" Silas drawled, leaning against the doorframe with a bored expression, though his pulse was racing. "I don't like being played vain," Sterling snapped, pushing his way into the foyer. "My man here spent all night looking into Zurich. There is no record of a silent partner with a daughter named Mia. In fact, the only Mia in this hotel is a waitress who went missing from the kitchen last night." "A waitress?" Silas let out a short mocking laugh. "Is that the best you can do? My guest is a private woman, Sterling. She doesn't exist on records, because her family pays a fortune to stay off them." "Then let her speak for herself," the investigator challenged, stepping forward. Just then the bedroom door clicked open. Mia stepped out, draped in a floor-length cream silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. She wore the oversized sunglasses, her hair tossed in a just-woken-up mess that somehow looked intentional and chic. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, her expression one of pure, haughty boredom. "Silas, darling," she drawled, her voice low and silky. "Who is making all this noise? I thought you said this building had security. If I wanted to hear men shouting about waitresses, I would have stayed in Europe." She walked over to Silas, sliding her arm through his and leaning her head on his shoulder. "Is this the man who was staring at my fork last night? He has very poor manners." Sterling froze. The dossier in the investigator's hand seemed suddenly flimsy. Mia didn't look like a girl who washed dishes. She looked like a woman who had never seen a dish in her life. We have reports," the investigator stammered, looking at Mia's poise. "Reports are for people who can't afford the truth," Silas said, placing a protective hand over Mia's. "Now get out of my home before I have the board remove you for harassment. You're lucky she doesn't sue you for the headache you've just given her." When the door finally slammed shut behind them, Mia didn't collapse this time. She took off the sunglasses and looked at Silas, a triumphant spark in her eyes. "I think I'm getting the hang of this," she whispered. Silas looked at her, his expression a mix of awe and something much deeper. "You didn't just get the hang of it, Mia. You just won the war. But now we have to make sure you never have to pretend again." Silas caught the glint of the lens a split second after Mia did. His body language didn't change, he didn't even look toward the parked car, but his grip on Mia's waist tightened just enough to signal her to stay calm. "Don't look," he whispered against her hair, his voice a low vibration. "Let them take the photo. If we chase them now, they'll know they hit a nerve. If we let them walk away, they'll think they have the winning card. But they have photos of us here, Mia murmured into his chest, her heart hammering. They'll know I'm not an heiress. They'll see this building, my mother. They'll see exactly what I want them to see, Silas countered. He pulled back, a dangerous, clever light dancing in his eyes. They think they've found your weakness. They don't realize they've just handed me the rope to hang Sterling's career. As they drove away, Silas was already on his burner phone. Marcus, I need the redemption file ready for the Founders Gala on Friday. And get me the guest list for the press pit. I want Sterling's favorite tabloid reporter front and center. The next few days were a whirlwind of high-fashion fittings and intense briefings. Silas transformed the penthouse into a war room. He didn't just teach Mia how to walk and talk, he shared the true books of the Ethelgard with her. He showed her the evidence of Sterling's embezzlement, the very thing Silas had been too afraid to use until now. Why now? Mia asked as she practiced walking in 6-inch Louboutins. Because before he could have crushed me by targeting my reputation, Silas said, watching her with unabashed admiration. But now he's going to target you. And the one thing Sterling doesn't realize is that while I'm a ghost, you're a flame. He's going to walk right into the fire. The night of the Founders Gala arrived. The Grand Ethelgard ballroom was even more opulent than the night they met. As Silas and Mia stepped out of the limousine, the flashbulbs were blinding. Mia wore a dress of crimson silk that looked like liquid fire, her hand resting firmly on Silas's arm. They hadn't even reached the champagne fountain before Sterling intercepted them. He looked smug, holding a manila envelope with a predatory grin. Vain, Sterling sneered, glancing at Mia with disgust. And the heiress. I have some lovely vacation photos I think the board would find fascinating. Or perhaps the press would like to know about the philanthropist who lives in a slum on 4th Street. The room went silent as the surrounding socialites leaned in to catch the drama. Silas didn't flinch. He took a sip of his drink, looking bored. You mean the photos of me visiting the site of the new Rossi Foundation housing project? The one I'm announcing tonight in honor of my fiancé's incredible work in urban development. Sterling's smile faltered. Fiancé? Housing project? Don't lie your way out of this, Silas. I have the proof she's a waitress. A waitress? Mia stepped forward, her voice projected perfectly for every reporter to hear. Mr. Sterling, I went undercover in your kitchen for 2 weeks to document the health code violations and the mistreatment of staff that you've been ignoring. How else do you think I obtained the digital records of your private offshore accounts stored on the kitchen's main server? She pulled a small, sleek USB drive from her clutch and held it up. The color drained from Sterling's face so fast he looked like he might faint. The waitress you saw, Silas added, his voice cold and triumphant, is the woman who just secured the evidence for your indictment. Security. As the police, who had been waiting in the wings, stepped forward to escort a sputtering Sterling out of the ballroom, the crowd erupted into whispers and applause. Silas turned to Mia, the cold mask finally falling away for good. He didn't care about the cameras or the board members. He pulled her into his arms right there in the center of the room. You were incredible, he whispered. I told you, Mia smiled, leaning in for the kiss the whole world was waiting to see. I'm done being invisible. The Grand Ethelgard was no longer a place of hiding for Mia. 6 months after the night Sterling was led away in handcuffs, the ballroom was once again glowing, but the atmosphere had shifted from cold corporate posturing to genuine warmth. The Rossi Foundation was officially opening its doors, and the first project, a state-of-the-art housing and education complex, was already halfway finished. Mia stood on the grand balcony, looking out over the city she had once traversed as an invisible worker. She wore a simple, elegant white gown, her hair falling in soft waves. The weight of the world felt lighter now. The board is asking for the guest of honor, a familiar, deep voice rumbled behind her. She turned to see Silas. He had ditched the stiff tie, his top button undone, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He walked over and stood beside her, his hand naturally finding the small of her back. I think the guest of honor is busy looking at the empire she helped rebuild, Mia teased, leaning her head against his shoulder. I didn't rebuild this, Mia. You did, Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave this company a heart. You gave me a heart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't wait for a grand moment in front of the cameras. Right there in the quiet moonlight of the balcony, he dropped to one knee. Mia Rossi, I spent my life thinking the only way to be powerful was to be alone. You showed me that real power is having someone to come home to. I don't want to spend another night in that penthouse if you aren't there with me. Will you marry me? Mia didn't hesitate. Yes, Silas. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the diamond onto her finger, the doors to the ballroom opened. Instead of an investor or a spy, it was Mia's mother, looking healthy and radiant in a new silk dress, followed by the staff from the kitchen, Mia's old friends, who had all been invited as VIP guests. The mistake at the billionaire's table had led to the most intentional, beautiful life Mia could have imagined. Silas pulled her into a kiss as the city lights twinkled below them, no longer a sea of strangers, but a community they were building together.